And welcome to the SpartanMag.com VCast. Jim Comparoni, Paul Konyndyk, Perlis Plaza, campus of Michigan State University. Michigan State's 2-0. Big win at Maryland last weekend. Michigan State looked good in a lot of ways, coming back and getting it done. The resiliency that head coach Jonathan Smith talked about earlier in the week. But, you know, Michigan State, everyone knows the turnovers were a problem. 3 interceptions, 1 slipped out of his hand. And turnovers are a big part. Everybody knows that. If the turnovers had been even, Michigan State wins that game by 10 or 14. They won the game despite having a 3-to-1 negative ratio in turnovers, which is very hard to do, especially on the road. Not that was a difficult place to play necessarily, but Michigan State is just solving the turnover situation away from taking a step as a team, in my opinion. The run game has to come together also, but Michigan State getting it done even though being a -2 in turnovers.
Yeah, I think when you go back and look at that, and plus the turnovers, like you mentioned, the one slipped out of his hand, that happens. But the other ones that we talked about earlier is the footwork stuff. That can totally be addressed. I think one of the issues you have when you have a true freshman or a first-year starting quarterback is you have to accept that there's going to be a certain number of mistakes, whether that's trying to do too much in a certain situation or like just bad footwork or whatever. You're going to get some of that. The goal, however, is that moving forward that those mistakes are going to be reduced a little bit at a time. And I think Aiden Childs took a huge step forward in that game. But I think if you took away those 2 turnovers, like you mentioned, there's so many good things in that game, even with the turnovers. I think it changes the calculus on how we view the defensive performance. I think it's easy to say that narrative is first week the defense dominated, and the second week the offense helped bail out the defense. I don't necessarily think that was the case, and I thought in this game, like all 3 phases, special teams, defense, and offense did some good things, more good things than bad things, and I thought the defense was really, really good against a tough Maryland team, who does a ton of good things. They really don't lose very many games early in the season. That's because not a lot of everything is on film. But Michigan State did a great job on defense. I'll go back to that first scoring drive. Maryland marched on the field 13 plays. But if it's not for like a freak completion on a shovel pass, Michigan State gets off the field on that play, and then the other scoring drives, most of those were preceded by, like an interception.
Mm-hmm. And we talked about that third down play, the shovel pass on the opening drive. Maryland scores. Michigan State came with the zone pressure. They drop Bogle into coverage. They bring Gross on a he's rushing, so he's part of a 4-man rush. Gross has him dead to rights and misses a sack. So the defense has a correct play, has a nice play call that they went to a little bit on third down with various looks with zone pressures, and the quarterback is confused. It's looks like a blitz. There's 7 in coverage. Nobody's open. I'm about to get sacked. Now I escape and do a flip, and the guy catches it, and they move the pile, and they get a first down. They score a touchdown. If you're a defensive coordinator, you feel like you push the buttons to get yourself off the field. Angelo Gross had a very good game, first game. Not as good this game, but he did a lot of good things anyway. But it was part of what Michigan State did throughout the day. I thought third downs, Maryland was very successful. Third down conversion percentage and completion percentage was high, but there were like 2 or 3 plays where there's a third down tuck and run where nobody was open, tuck and run, and they punt. It's not an incompletion, but it might as well have been. Michigan State, for as many players as they're playing on defense, going too deep a lot of positions, and a lot of first-year players, and they're not just running 1 or 2 things. They're running a multitude of things, and you're not seeing many communication problems on defense. You're not seeing assignment busts. They're doing a lot of things in a short period of time with a lot of players, and I'm impressed with the way you got 11 guys playing with one brain, staying on the same page, arriving at the ball with numbers for gang tackling, running to the ball, all those things, defeating blocks. They look like one of those Minnesota defenses, and he's done it in 2 games, Joe Rossi I'm talking about, in a short period of time. And he loses a safety and loses defensive tackles after spring practice. I'm impressed with that part of the operation, Paul.
Yeah, we talk a lot of times, like when you face a certain offense, it does a great job with the shell game of changing pictures and formations and whatnot, and getting you in different situations. I think Michigan State has played a defensive shell game, and they're not, they haven't tipped their hand very much. That's the impressive thing to me. And I'll go back to, you mentioned Joe Rossi. One of the things that he does better than a lot of guys is he just harps on the fine details. And you would think in this transfer portal era that you couldn't do that, that everything has to be, big picture, not small picture. And Rossi, it's the details, the attention to detail, the amount of film study they do, the notes they take. It's really made a difference. And just talking to some of the linebackers today, talking to Wayne Matthews and who else was out there? Jordan Hall. Both those guys are enjoying it. They're enjoying being part of the shell game and mixing things up. You asked Lingy, defensive line coach, about guys going in a 2-point stance, a 3-point stance, and there's lots of just moving parts coverage. It's I think it's a fun defense for those guys to play, because at one level, like for linebackers, you get one gap, so you don't have as much thinking to do, but you're also giving the offense more things to think about than you typically would on defense. And so by doing that, you're taking it to them a little bit more than letting them manipulate you. And I think these guys out there, the guys that are playing, are having a great time doing it. And
they've not been perfect, of course, on defense. In game one, there was a miscommunication on a little crack and go where Ade Willie let the guy go, touchdown, cuts it to 16-10 in the late going, and there was a wheel route that got loose against Maryland, and we talked about that a few minutes ago. Darius Snow and Jordan Turner were both involved there. I'm not 100% sure who was at fault there, but Michigan State was in cover 4. The other 3 guys in the defensive backfield. Brantley was in man-to-man, clears the area. So I don't know if that's a combination coverage or what, or man-on-demand with that. Normally in cover 4 you stay there, but I don't think Brantley was at fault. Anyway, in cover 4, the wheel route has always been a weakness. We saw that from back in the D'Antonio days. Or if it's man-to-man and you clear the area, that's a weakness. In terms of the weakness is that the linebacker has to recognize it right now and run, usually with a running back. In this case, it was a tight end out of the backfield, not quite as fast as a running back, but that's one of the weaknesses. Every defense has a weakness, like D'Antonio used to say. So, we saw that. Boston College did that against Florida State. So they've not been perfect on defense, but for the amount of things they're doing and the physicality they're playing with, Nakai Martinez, I watched the Central Florida game against Oklahoma, and he was a sophomore, and Michigan State liked him and everything. And I didn't watch the entire season, but he was not as physical as he is now. Right. The way he's running and hitting people, and he had an aggressive sweep tackle in the third or fourth quarter on Saturday. That's not the way he played against Oklahoma. Against Oklahoma, I wrote about it when we were doing the State of the Program series. He kind of throttled down too early on several occasions as a habit, I thought. And I was like, well, as a young player, I mean, there were true sophomores last year at Michigan State that had habits that need to be cleaned up. Those have been cleaned up, and he's playing with physicality. He's a different player there. Secondly, what they've done in the portal, the evaluation, Jalen Satchel, Wayne Matthews, Nakai Martinez, Ed Woods. These are not red letter, 4-star guys in the portal getting all the offers. They went and found some value picks in the portal, and then they've coached them up and got them to play. And it's to me, going back over the game, I'm like, this is not a defense that's just surviving. This has a chance to be a defense that's good, and I think angling toward being in the top third of the Big Ten, which might not sound like a great deal, but if you're in the top 6 defenses in the Big Ten, you've got a good defense. And I think they could be there statistically and otherwise. Now they've got to play Ohio State. They've got to play some other explosive teams coming up. But it looks to me like a type of team that would normally be in the top third of the Big Ten, and that's huge improvement over what we saw in the previous 4 years.
Well, how do you become a top third defense in the Big Ten? You can't do it without depth. You can't do it with a linebacker playing 80 snaps a game. You can't do it with your defensive tackles playing 50 to 60 snaps a game. It's impossible. You're a top third defense. We covering the D'Antonio era, they were there almost every year. As he got it going. But the thing that once they built a defensive line depth, once they built to the point where they could get 4 or 5 tackles consistently rolling in there, and they had linebacker depth where you could trust their second stringers to come in, and you had quality guys come on. rotating into the defensive backfield, that's when you become a top third in the Big Ten type of defense. And yeah, the value picks are impressive. You mentioned Nikai Martinez being physical against the run, but I think going back and watching that Maryland game, and Maryland's very hard to tackle in space. It's one of the things that make that defense tough. We saw last year, in the last 2 years, Michigan State played them, and they had all kinds of trouble, bringing guys down in space with missed tackles. But you see a whole bunch of guys flying in there and making plays, but you also see the faith that they have a teammate that's going to rally to the ball.
Yeah, they're rallying so well.
And we haven't seen that since the D'Antonio era, and that was like a point of emphasis then. But going back to like Nikai Martinez, you also saw Ed Woods, a guy from Arizona State, Pac-12. They don't have the best reputation in terms of like being physical defensive backs. Ed Woods, each of the last 2 weeks, has thrown his hat in there and made physical plays. Chuck Brantley, the smallest corner on the team, has been really ultra physical. When he's been playing out there, but it's guy after guy, and you don't get that without a mandate from the top that this is how we're going to do things. Our defensive backs, if they want to play, they're going to have to bring it. And I think when you have the faith that guys are going to rally to the ball, populate to the ball, then you can spill it if you're a defensive player, because if you don't make that tackle, then you've got a guy to clean you up, and that's something that we kind of basically took for granted during the D'Antonio era, where there's always going to be 2 or 3 hats at the ball, guys making plays. But very, very impressive, and that's one of the ways you really can kind of shut down some of those perimeter run plays. Maryland did not have the yak yards they're used to. Population
to the ball. And every team in the country wants to run to the ball and get help and play to your help and so forth, but there's some that do it within the framework exceptionally well. And we saw that at Minnesota. That's what I talked about when they hired Rossi. That's one of the things when Minnesota blew out Michigan State here 2 years ago. When I wrote in the pre-snap read, I'm impressed with their defense. It reminds me of the Iowa Hawkeyes, the way they rallied to the ball. And Michigan State is showing that this early in the process. I'm impressed with it. Secondly, think about some of the guys that are quote-unquote second-string players right now. Jordan Hall, Wayne Matthews, Darius Snow. You've got
Ken Talley, Anthony Jones.
And, at defensive tackle, you've got guys coming in.
Maverick
Hansen. These are second-string defensive players. In year one, we didn't know some of those players a few months ago, but to be able to magic wand depth and create it somehow, manufacture it with existing players and the portal, I got to tell you, I think the defense is ahead of schedule. I think Maryland has a really good offense, and Michigan State did well to hold them, like I wrote in one of my articles on Sunday morning, held them under 450. That's not bad against Maryland, and it's going to show up against other teams too.
And I don't think they do that. I don't you look at that last,
and that's after losing 2.5 starters to injury, somewhat starters.
Right, but I don't think Michigan State is able to do that if they're playing with their personnel substitutions, even with, in some cases, you got good players like Simeon Barrow and Derek Harmon. Those are quality guys that I probably think would really thrived in this system if they had stayed and bought in and whatnot. But you aren't able to get those third and short stoppages the way that Michigan State was, or force some incompletions, or force some tough throws by Billy Edwards if you don't have fresh bodies on the field. And so it's really
Satchel coming in doing some things.
Yeah, Ruquan Buckley. I mean, that's a guy. Honestly, you and I have talked about Ruquan Buckley, and he's a guy he's from my neck of the woods, Godwin Heights, which is in Wyoming, suburb of Grand Rapids, and doesn't have a lot of technique. Has got a lot of raw. He's got size and he's got some athletic ability. But you and I both did not think that he was a guy that was going to get on the field and make plays, let alone being as firm as he was against the run. You expect a guy like that, okay, if he gets some traction, maybe he makes a plus pass rush move or something like that. But here's a guy that's got, firm. Jalen Satchel, playing firm. And, when you ask Coach Lengy about it today, I'm not going to say he was arrogant, because he wasn't, but he has a self-assuredness, like, hey, we know what we're doing in evaluation. We also know what we're doing teaching. So, these guys believe in their players. They believe in their coaching ability to coach them up and put them in the right position to make plays. But also, I think that self-confidence, filters down to the players when Coach puts you in and he says, Rue, get in there and make this play, and he believes that you're going to do it. We've seen that with basketball in the NCAA tournament with Tom Izzo. For whatever reason, a switch gets flipped, and everybody has the self-confidence that they're going to make the play when they need to, and it happens. Yeah. And there's been a lot of confidence instilled in a lot of different guys, and those guys go into the game. They believe in the scheme. They believe in their coaches. They believe in their teammates, but they go in expecting to make plays. And that's no easy feat to accomplish for a coaching staff in this short of time.
Yeah, Buckley, he only played a couple snaps, but he went in like fourth quarter. And like you said, I mean, he was a refrigerator out there. He didn't budge. I can't remember if it was a double team or I think it was a double team, and he just withstood it. And for him to be a third stringer and remain engaged the whole game, and like you said, I watched him. He had like 21 snaps against Michigan last year, and I watched it. And I talked to some people that cover Nebraska, and they're like, "Well, Michigan State just must need some bodies." They didn't think much of him, just like you said. And I didn't really expect much. And then when he got in the game, and I just noticed it last night when I was watching. I'm like, man, Buckley was solid in there. And Lange's like, yeah, we put a guy in there. Nobody's moving that guy. And to have a third string like that they got off of waivers pretty much, that is functional. Gets back to player development and evaluation. They saw something in him, and he is engaged and bought in, and pitched a couple of outs of short relief there. And it was nice for Michigan State to get that. So defense ahead of schedule. It's impressive the way they're doing it with the depth. And Bogle, like we said last week, I think he's a different player with the speed. That Talley came in and almost had that sack fumble on that play. I think it was a wrist club, and he bent and accelerated and got to him almost for a sack, and he's been applying some pressure the week before. When he made that play, when I was watching it again, I swear his uniform changed to a Penn State uniform, because he looked like a Penn State defensive end on that play, which is what he used to be before he transferred here. He was only there for a few weeks. But, that's a guy that played defensive tackle last year in November out of necessity. Now he's moving back outside, and you're seeing some athleticism. Talley has got a good future. Defense is in very good hands, and you can tell they're fired up about it.
Anthony Jones, second straight week that he's showed up loud on film, and that's another guy. Obviously Chad Wilt was at Indiana, so he knew something about that roster. But that's another guy that probably didn't have a whole lot of people banging on his door.
He's kind of a Sam linebacker, played a little bit of edge, but now he's just an edge at Michigan State.
Right,
and he didn't look like this on film last year.
And he is so active out there. So, the coaching, the technique, the fact that you've got two guys working with a defensive line, and then the continuity in that front seven, the way they play together. I think that's the other thing, like covering Michigan State defense for the last 3 years. I'm not going to say robotic, but there were different sections of the defense. These guys are playing well together. Linebackers and defensive line, the front seven really plays well
together.
Winning
up front. They've not played a good offensive line yet. That was one of Maryland's weaknesses. They're an okay, retooled Big Ten offensive line. They'll face better offensive lines later.
But they get rid of the ball quickly, and they have plus skill players, and they have a scheme where it makes it really tough to get to that guy. And I'll say this too: there's been other times where Michigan State in week 2 or week 3 played a Power 5 opponent after dominating some inferior teams, and you're like, okay, they should be able to get some pressure on these guys. I think the first time they played Washington, I wasn't overly impressed with that Washington offensive line. When they played them, and they didn't get any pressure, and it's a process. And then after a couple of games of playing like Power 5 type teams, they were able to get some pressure. I just think these guys are still a work in progress. So the fact that everyone's contributing has created an environment where everyone wants to get better. And, I'll go back to what Cal Halliday said the other night over the game, is everyone is pulling for each other.
Yeah.
You're not like rooting for a guy to make a mistake so you can get back in the game. Everyone is on the same page and moving forward, and there's a lot of belief in self, and that's a huge thing because Michigan State hasn't had that the last 3 years.
Yeah, inability to run the ball. Maryland had an inability to run the ball. Loxley said that was a game changer for them. They tried to run, and then Maryland was trying to run the ball, and Michigan State stuffing it against a good offense. The opponent's going to get better here in the weeks ahead, but gosh, the defense is impressive so far. Michigan State with the offensive line, Jonathan Smith talked about that earlier in the week, that wants to get more physicality and pad level and all those things out of it. Stanton Ramil talked about it a little bit yesterday, that Michigan State, something that you and I talked about last week in terms of if it's a combination block, knowing when to release and who you're getting out to, identification and so forth. Michigan State's having some mistakes with that. I'm not seeing a lot of physical beatings. Lepo has had some struggles here and there. And it's interesting that Ramil got more and more play over there. And Stan Ramil's pass protection for a guy who's only played 2 games in his life, I mean, he's got the physical look. He's got the physical strength. You see it the way people bounce off of him. He moves well. I'm wondering if Baldwin ends up at right tackle, and if Lepo, I wonder if that ends up being the competition, Baldwin and Lepo for a starting job in right tackle. Not heard anything. I'm just curious about that because Ramil is on an upward slope, and the other coaches talked about the importance of. Smith talked about the importance of gelling and learning to play with one another. If they get that down, the whole team and the offense takes another step as well. I'm not sure if and when that's going to happen, but they're working on it.
Yeah, Ramil looks the part with the pass pro. He feels like that's kind of been the weakest part of his game so far. And he's got the body type. I mean, like he was on a track to. I really think that if he had stayed healthy last year, for better or worse, he would have found his way onto the field. I kind of feel that way. They were having conversations with him about whether he was feeling like he wanted to play in a rotation. Midway through training camp is when he injured himself, so that kind of took him off the table. But he was pushing people. He thinks that he's pretty hard on himself, but he was saying that he feels like his posture at times in pass pro hasn't been as good as it needs to be. But he feels like he needs to avoid lunging. But he feels like for this offensive line to take the step that they need to take. They have to do, like you said, a better job with the combos, but they've got to be more consistent in getting movement, and a lot of that is just knowing what you're supposed to do, being physical. But he said, it's not the fact that we're not getting big plays, because there have been some good runs. We're not just getting enough of those 4- and 5-yard runs, because when you get 4- and 5-yard runs in the first 2 quarters, then those turn into big plays in the third quarter, and that's what typically happens. And Michigan State hasn't got enough of those. This week against Prairie View, A&M, they should have a chance to continue to work on their craft. And sometimes I always felt like week 3 is when you kind of get a good picture if there's not a lot of injuries for what you got as an offensive line, if they're moving in the right direction. But this is a chance for them to get it right and to work on things, and then they're going to have a big test at, obviously, Boston College, a really good team, with a lot of, it mirrors Michigan State in some ways, 2 programs that are really feeding off first-year coaches. Mm-hmm. But this is the week that they need to play well, get a couple things on the offensive line ironed out, and get to the point where you are getting those 4- and 5-yard runs. Because I feel like looking back at the game, there's times that they didn't gain enough yardage on the ground. They made up for it with passing, and there were also times though that they did pick up first downs and short yardage, and that's something that it might only be 2 yards or a yard here, but the fact that they're moving the sticks when the defense knows that you're going to run, and I think so. That's it. That's the kind of the silver lining for Michigan State is we've seen a lot of those short yardage deals with more experience on the offensive line fail. For the last 3 years. So the fact that Michigan State picked up 4 or 5 over the course of that game against Maryland, 3rd and shorts via the run, that's a good thing. The fact that they're harping on getting better is a good thing too, because they're not satisfied and they feel like there's more upside and a higher ceiling with this offensive line. So I really like what Michigan State's done on both sides of the ball and special teams. But even more, I like the emphasis that's being put on details that matter moving forward, because everyone acknowledges we haven't done nothing yet and the competition is going to get harder.
Right. It's a great point about 3rd and short, Michigan State converting, and also had chunk plays in the ground game. Where they're having problems is on a 1st and 10 run, penetration, you get stopped for a 4-yard loss. Those things are happening too much, and it's a communication thing. Like there's one time Michigan State was running an inside zone, and Maryland ends up spiking in the other direction. They get 3 guys in the backfield immediately. Maybe that's just a rock, paper, scissors situation. I'd have to ask someone, about that. But or if it's something that they should have identified earlier, I'm not sure. But there were maybe 4 or 5 plays where where nobody's getting beat physically, but a running back is getting hit 2 yards deep in the backfield. Happened a few times, and a lot of that's identification. Now, they want to be a deeply varied running attack, doing a lot of different things, not just an inside-outside 2-trick pony run game. They do a lot of different things. So if you're going to do a lot of different things, there's a chance things are going to fall through the cracks before you get everything solidified. In the long run, they're going to be varied and difficult to stop. But right now, not all of it is razor sharp. But like you said, they're working on it. Paul, did you know just a few years ago the state of Michigan ranked 1st in the nation for deposit container recycling. 90% of all purchased bottles and cans were being redeemed for their deposits. Today, only 73% are being redeemed. That means Michiganders are forfeiting $105 million every year in bottle returns that are not being redeemed. This deficit is having a negative impact on our environment. When Michigan's recycling rate drops, it hurts the environment, it hurts industry, and it hurts all of us. Help the environment, help yourself, take them back. They're your lakes, your roads, and your beaches, and it's your dime. So take them back. It's worth your time, and everyone will benefit. Take them back. A message from Schupan, a great Michigan company dedicated to recycling and dedicated to the Michigan State Spartans. Now, Michigan State football, Prairie View A&M coming in with a 1-1 record. FCS team. To me, Paul, this is a game about getting some guys on the field, coming out of the game healthy, but continuing to develop. Aiden Childs gets a chance to go through another, I'm not going to call it a dress rehearsal, but gets to go through pregame without feeling as scared as he was in the opener. He can come out, the coverages won't be as difficult as they were against Maryland, be able to get a handle on his RPMs and not have those sail, get his footwork together like Jonathan Smith talks about, and it's a chance for him to have a sharp, like 75% completion type of day. More importantly, maybe not more importantly, but also with the injuries they've had in the defensive backfield. Chance Rucker out for several weeks. Of course, Dylan Tatum out for the season. Ed Woods missed the end of that game on Saturday, not sure about his availability. So players like Jeremiah Hughes, transfer from LSU, came in, played about 20-plus snaps against Maryland. I tell you what, there's a play against the run in that game, which I didn't see live, but when I went back and watched it, he was rallying to the ball, and he, changed direction and accelerated through it and got in on a tackle. And just right then, I'm like, okay, I see what LSU saw in that guy. He was third string last year for LSU, maybe second string, played over 100 snaps on special teams as a true freshman. But with those other injuries, there's a chance he's on the field quickly. Legend Cavazos, transfer from North Carolina, last week moved from corner to safety because of the injuries Michigan State has at safety. Now, does he play both positions now, or does he stay at safety? In pregame at Maryland, Cavazos and true freshman Justin Denson repped as the second-string safeties last week in pregame. These are guys that you're going to need in some games down the road, whether it be against Oregon, Michigan, Iowa. All of a sudden you're going to need tag, you're it, Cavazos, you're in. Well, this is a game those guys theoretically should be able to get in, get their feet wet, get the communication down. I don't want to say dress rehearsal, but to me this is about defensive backs, some more people in that playing group, getting their feet wet, getting acclimated, and the offensive line potentially having a dominant game on the ground. To me, that's what this is about.
Yeah, Cavazos is the guy that I would, if you're talking about value to the program, I think, and he's a veteran player, he's been around for a long time, so I think you really got to try to get him reps at both positions and then play him where you need him. That to me, you're not going to do that with a true freshman like Denson. You're going to give him one position so he can be successful. You're not, unless you're spectacular, and there's not many guys that can play two positions, but give a veteran reps at both, and because you don't know, if Chuck Brantley goes down, then you've got to have corners. But so that's a big part of this game, and I also think there's other things you can work on as well. Maybe some freshmen do get a little bit more playing time. I think maybe you can get work on the tight end stuff. I know it's been a huge part of what Oregon State did. I know that they did some good stuff with the tight ends. Jack Velling got some key first downs, but there were some times where I felt like Aiden Childs had Jack Velling as his first read and didn't go to it. Maybe he could have. It'd be nice to see some of those things start going. It'd be nice to see a couple freshmen get on the field. Receivers, another position where Antonio Gates and Isaiah Johnson, they played last week, but guys get banged up, and we've seen what happened. In 2017, Michigan State won 10 games that year. But what really hurt them from having a higher ceiling is the fact that you had your three best receivers, and all of those guys were hurt in one way or another. Whether it's Cody White, Darryl Stewart, or my big dude Felton Davis, all those guys were playing through injuries, and they ended up winning that Penn State game late in the season because Felton Davis was able to come back from injury. But in a game like this, you would really like to see a guy like Antonio Gates, get oiled up, get confidence. Yes. Block.
Yes.
Do the right thing. Run the right routes at the right depths. And same with Isaiah Johnson. He's played 15 reps I was looking at like Pro Football Focus last night. He's played 15 reps at the slot. Can he play a different position? Can you get him some reps at both? Gates is a guy that can play multiple positions, but those guys need to get some productive quality snaps so you can earn some trust with them, and they can play, because there's going to be a time where maybe Nick Marsh isn't able to go, or maybe it's not even a long-term injury. Maybe it's a guy loses a helmet or something like that, or is dinged up for a minute. But you got to get your guys ready to play. And the one thing I do appreciate about this Michigan State team so far is they've been committed to developing depth. And they've rolled with it, and it hasn't just been lip service. They've been willing to, some people would say that's a risk. And we've seen a lot of good teams over the years play a static number of guys and not go to backups and whatnot, and eventually be burnt by that. I think Michigan in the early years of the Jim Harbaugh era, they had a lot of issues with that, where they overplayed guys. These guys, much like D'Antoni, are committed to playing a large playing group because they know they're going to need them. And with that schedule coming up next month, they are definitely going to need a lot of guys. And this is a game where you can get some of those guys oiled up.
I think D'Antoni will like to get second stringers going, especially on the offensive line. But on defense, these guys are playing more on defense.
Yeah,
than
absolutely.
D'Antonio
But it's
did.
a different era too. And like you saw, at the end of the D'Antonio era, like when Pat Narduzzi was there at the end, D'Antonio and him kind of clashed a little bit. D'Antonio wanting to play more guys. I thought as they got into the later years of the D'Antonio era, you were seeing more linebackers, more defensive backs rotating in there, and that's kind of just the trend, the way college football is trending. Now, you just have to have. You can't be static. You can't have traditional size linebackers. You have to have different personnel for different situations, and I think that's what Michigan State has. You talk about a guy like Wayne Matthews, who's out for interviews today. He's played he's probably averaging 25 snaps a game, but those are super productive snaps, and he's playing in a lot of passing situations and playing well. That's a luxury that Michigan State has, and they haven't had in the past couple of years. It's almost like a defensive, an NFL type of scenario where you've got a guy that's a situational linebacker. And I know he can be more than that, and he will next year as guys graduate. But that's a luxury to have guys come in that can play a role and execute at a high level, like Wayne Matthews. And
third down can move around real well in pass defense. Sometimes they drop them deep middle like a Tampa 2. So they're also putting a lot on film to confuse quarterbacks. And Michigan State football, we'll find out in the next couple of weeks, Boston College, and then as they get into the middle four. But as of now, I'm not shutting the door on Michigan State emerging as a surprise team nationally.
Right.
A long way to go to make that happen, but there's good things going on in there. Hopefully, for their sake, the injury bug will subside a little bit because they've been hit pretty hard by it a little bit here and there, able to withstand it at some positions. But, Dylan Tatum, I thought he looked fast in the opening game, sideline to sideline. If he's still with this outfit, that defense would be even that much better. That was a loss. Christian Phillips, I thought, looked good at right guard. They miss him. Gavin Brocious started at right guard. It's the first time he's ever played in a college football game. Redshirt sophomore, missed his, he redshirted in year one. Last year, injured. He didn't play against Florida Atlantic. He's starting against Maryland, has never played college football, and had some mistakes here and there. Dallas Fincher started the second half. Brocious will learn from it. But they can't absorb many more dings on that offensive line. I'm impressed the way Michigan State going deep as often as they do, making a defense defend the entire width and vertical lanes of the field, and they're just getting started. It's kind of fun, Paul, to watch how they're putting this together.
It helps when you have a quarterback like Aiden Childs that can take a couple steps, cover ground pretty quickly, and get rid of the ball as quickly as he does with as much velocity as he does. So, when we talk about him having bad footwork, these are just little minor things. His skill set, the toolbox that he has is pretty amazing. And, going back to D'Antonio, Coach D'Antonio, talking to him after the game, he was talking about from a physical standpoint, defending a quarterback like that, because he does enable you to overcome maybe some of the inexperience on the offensive line. You can elude pressure with a step and still have the arm strength and the ability to throw downfield the way he does. It's pretty impressive.
And the footwork. Connor Cook, early in his career, had problems with accuracy, and I remember Brad Salem, quarterbacks coach at the time, saying, "Well, we got to get his footwork together." And at the time I was writing, I'm like, in covering football, I don't remember a quarterback ever with the amount of accuracy problems Cook had early in his career. I don't remember that ever getting solved or fixed. I think about Stephen Reeves and some others. I'm like, if they don't have it, it's not going to come around. Well, it came around with Connor Cook. Started with footwork. So now that's the second time I've heard this. Frame of reference expands as you've been doing this for a while. Jonathan Smith, former quarterback, they're on it. The RPMs will get it equalized a little bit with him also. Just ramping down, getting that adrenaline under control. And I think that accuracy thing is going to come around. And as it does, it makes him more and more dangerous.
The one thing about he has that he shares with Connor Cook is he has that self-belief and that self-confidence and the resilience where if he makes a mistake, it's water off a duck's butt type of thing, and he's able to bounce back. And that's something that you really can't teach. Either you have it or you don't. And it's a hard thing to get with a quarterback.
All right, anything else, Paul? For Paul Konyndyk, my name is Jim Comparoni. Been watching the VCast. Give us a like here on the channel. Subscribe to the channel. Go to SpartanMag.com. Become a Magger. Be a subscriber over there. We'd love to have you over there. You'll like it. For Konyndyk, my name is Comparoni. Been watching the VCast in East Lansing with the Spartans for SpartanMag.com.